It doesn't actually say that. I can't talk about the book The Last Battle without talking about the problem of Susan. Hi friends, Deirdre here, all things art and books. Welcome back to my channel and welcome if you're new here. I do all kinds of videos about art and books and quite often combine them as I have been doing in this Narnia series. I've been painting a painting for each of the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis and at the same time doing book reviews. So check those out if you haven't already. But this video is going to be the finale because it is the final book, C.S. Lewis's The Last Battle. But this one's slightly different because the review that I'm going to give, and the painting as well, is a big spoiler for the book. So if you're like me and had been living under a rock and didn't know what all the controversy was about The Last Battle, then maybe you want to read the book first. But I'm breaking away for that for this book because there is so much controversy and so much talk about C.S. Lewis's The Last Battle and the final book in the Narnia series. C.S. Lewis himself has come under a lot of criticism for this book and in fact for the Narnia series as a result of it, and I didn't know that. So this review, I can't talk about the book The Last Battle without talking about the problem of Susan. So the painting that I've done for The Last Battle is a reflection of the problem of Susan. Here we have Susan. And it's also, I took inspiration from a line and a quote that Lucy, her sister, said in The Last Battle. "Yes," said Queen Lucy, "in our world too, a stable once had something inside it that was bigger than our whole world." So that's, of course, is a reflection of the Nativity, Christ's Nativity. So this is why I've done the stable, but I've done Mary and Jesus in the sky, reflecting that Jesus was something bigger than the whole world and the implications of what happened on that night Jesus was born. We've got Susan here coming to find Christ. So enjoy the painting, enjoy the review, and I'll give my thoughts on the book as we go. So looking at The Last Battle, C.S. Lewis has actually come under a lot of criticism for, in fact, the entire Chronicles of Narnia, but particularly The Last Battle. And several accusations have been levelled at Lewis. And I want to talk about that, but also to give my tuppence worth on the problem of Susan. And is there actually a problem? One of the first criticisms is that, first of all, there's too much Christianity in it. But C.S. Lewis was a Christian apologetic. He wrote the books, all 7 books, as Christian allegories. So I don't feel you can accuse him of having too much Christianity in Christian books. That's like me coming along and saying, reading a detective book and saying, I don't like crime, reading about crime. Well, I'm not going to read detective books. If somebody doesn't want to read a Christian book, for me, they shouldn't be reading the Chronicles of Narnia, because that is ultimately what they are about. And the Christian message and the Christian theme is thick throughout the books. And they are not just simple fantasy stories for children or adults. They are Christian allegories. And I feel and think that whenever you read these books, you have to read them as such. You can't take Christianity out of these stories because that is the core of them. That is what Christianity is, what these books were built around. So that's the first accusation. The second thing, and this is a big spoiler, the second thing he has been accused of is a terrible ending. I'm going to say what the ending is, so say if you've never read the book and you don't want to know, switch off now. Accused of this terrible ending to the whole series. And I believe this is unfounded. Again, you've got to remember the Christian core of this. The last battle is a complete allegory for the end of days. The last battle, when everything is going to be wrapped up, whenever Christ is going to come again, and there will be a new heaven and a new earth. That is the allegory of the last battle. It's Armageddon, basically. At the end of the last battle, all the characters of Narnia that we've come to know and love, Polly, Diggory, Eustace, all three of the Pevensey children, there's Peter, Edmund and Lucy, Eustace's friend Jill, they're all, and others, everyone we've come to know and love in the entire series are all killed in a train crash, except Susan. Very last page. And you go, what? And on the face of it, that sounds horrendous. Why on earth did C.S. Lewis put this in a children's book? You've got to go back to the Christian allegory. The whole thing is wrapped up. The earth's going to be wrapped up. The children and everybody that we've come to know and love, they go to Aslan's country. They go to heaven. So this is actually a very happy ending. The descriptions that Lewis has done in the last 2 or 3 chapters of what he is trying to explain heaven is like, and obviously nobody knows until they go there. But he does this so beautifully. So it's not a sad ending. All these people go to heaven. And this book is about wrapping the whole thing up. The old Narnia is the Shadowlands, but Aslan's country is the new Narnia, heaven. And everybody goes to be with Aslan. Aslan, of course, is an allegory for Jesus Christ. And all the believers go to be with Jesus. You can't get away from the fact it's a Christian allegory. These are not simple fantasy stories for children. You've got to remember that when you're reading it. So with that light, it is not a sad ending and it's not a terrible ending. More specifically, in the last battle, Lewis has been accused of being sexist. He's been accused of being against beautiful women. In the last battle, there's actually very, very little said about Susan. But there is a little passage, and you've got to read it very, very carefully because it can be misconstrued. It is when Tyrion, the last king of Narnia, comes and meets all the people that we've come to know. So Tyrion is addressing High King Peter, okay? Sire, said Tyrion, when he had greeted all of these, if I have read the Chronicles aright, there should be another. Has not your majesty 2 sisters? Where is Queen Susan? My sister, Susan, answered Peter shortly and gravely, is no longer a friend of Narnia. Yes, said Eustace, and whenever you've tried to get her to come and talk about Narnia or do anything about Narnia, she says, what wonderful memories you have. Fancy you're still thinking about all those funny games we used to play when we were children. Oh, Susan, said Jill. She's interested in nothing nowadays except nylons and lipstick and invitations. She always was a jolly sight too keen on being grown up. Grown up indeed, said the Lady Polly. I wish she would grow up. She wasted all her school time wanting to be the age she is now, and she'll waste all the rest of her life trying to stay that age. Her whole idea is to race on to the silliest time of one's life as quick as she can and then stop there as long as she can. Well, don't let's talk about that now, said Peter. So that is all we're told about. And this line has become such a debating point. It's where Peter says, my sister Susan is no longer a friend of Narnia. And people, again, accuse Lewis of saying, oh, Aslan has turned its back on Susan. Look what Susan did for Narnia. Look at everything. Look at Aslan. Don't think much of Aslan. He's turned his back on Susan. Narnia's turned his back on Susan. That's terrible. It doesn't actually say that. The text doesn't say that. Peter says, my sister Susan is no longer a friend of Narnia. This is why she wasn't on the train that killed all the others. Susan is no longer a friend of Narnia. You gotta look at what it doesn't say. It doesn't say that Narnia and Aslan is no longer a friend of Susan. So going back to the Christian allegory, we can turn our backs on God, but he never turns his back on us. And that's the message there. At no point in the story are we told that Narnia has ever turned its back on Susan. It's Susan that has got caught up in worldly things. Happens all the time. Now, gotta be careful what way I say this. One of the big accusations levelled against Lewis in the last battle is the charge of racism. On the surface of it, I get where people are coming from with this. There is a term which Lewis uses that on the surface of it could be construed as racist. It's a particular word he uses. Now, I'm not even going to say the word. See, the problem is people don't read things properly. And that's my opinion. You see a lot of people on YouTube, you see a lot of people on BookTube, and they'll come out and they'll say things like, oh, I read 25 books in a month, or I read a book in an afternoon. And I don't think you can. C.S. Lewis's writing, for a start, they may be children's stories, but they are very, very rich. They are very, very detailed. You'll never get the true meaning of things if you don't sit down and read every word and immerse yourself in the story. Now, I don't know what other people do, but when I'm reading a book, it actually becomes that I don't see the words on the page. I'm actually seeing the scene in front of me in my mind's eye. I'm not immersed in it. Now, I don't think you can get that from skimming or rushing your way quickly through a story. And I think that's a lot of where the misinterpretation comes from. I could be wrong, but that's what I feel. Now, this particular term that is used by Lewis, on the surface of it, could appear to be racist until you sit and read it properly and realise, again, going back to the Christian parable. The last battle is a story about the end of days. It is the battle against good and evil. It is the battle against light and dark. And that is where that term comes from. It's got nothing to do with the colour of anybody's skin. It's got nothing to do with racism. It's to do with light and dark, good and evil. And that is the allegory. It's got nothing to do with racism. And how can I say that with absolute confidence? How do I know in my mind that Lewis isn't being racist when he uses that term? To my mind, he's not being racist because we would not have had the character of Emeth. Emeth was a character who was on the dark side, the side of darkness, fighting against Narnia. And he worshipped a false god, the demonic god Tash. But he came to be in heaven with Aslan and with the others. Now, why is that? It's because we're told he had been seeking for the truth all his life. Now, if Lewis had been being racist, he wouldn't have had a character from that side finding the truth. Emeth finds himself in heaven and with Aslan, who he has never believed in before. He can't understand it at the beginning. And he says, I have been seeking Tash all my days. Remember that Tash is the false god. I have been seeking Tash all my days. Then Aslan, remember Aslan's an allegory for Jesus Christ. Aslan says to him, Beloved, said the glorious one, unless thy desire had been for me, thou wouldst not have sought so long And so truly, for all find what they truly seek. And that sentiment is biblical, and that is straight out of the Bible. And I'm going to quote the Bible here. Jeremiah 29, verse 13. And ye shall seek me and find me, when ye shall search for me with all your heart. Amos has been seeking for the truth all his life. We are told in Scripture that if we seek the truth, we will find it. And this is what has happened to Amos. He has been diligently searching for the truth all his life, even though he was brought up on the wrong side. But because he was seeking, he wanted to know, he found Aslan. If that term had been used in a racist manner, Lewis wouldn't have put Amos in there. So this sexism argument is quite often rooted in the idea when Jill says that Susan's no longer interested in anything except nylons and lipstick and invitations. And then Polly goes on to say she's trying to be grown up and then she wants to put the brakes on the aging processes, which is what we all want to do, basically. But that's just a statement of fact. She's become interested in worldly things. That happens to everyone. How often do people be brought up in the Christian faith and then later on down the line they turn their back on it? It's got nothing to do with God turning his back on us. It's us that turns our back on God. So that to me, that argument doesn't even make sense. And Lewis is certainly not being sexist in that. He's just stating that Susan has got interested in worldly things. If Lewis had been sexist, don't forget, you've got to look at the other things he's writing if you're going to accuse him of anything like that. He's accused of not liking beautiful women. Well, there's two other ones. In the Chronicles of Narnia, there's a Queen Swan White who was renowned for her beauty. And Lewis speaks about her in a favourable light. If he was sexist, he wouldn't do that. Then there's Ramandu's daughter, who her beauty was legendary. She married Prince Caspian and was a good character and talked again favourably of by Lewis. So you can't level sexism at him. He talks about beautiful women in his books in a favourable way. So that statement with Susan is just a statement of fact. She's got interested in worldly things. Another reason why you can't accuse Lewis of being sexist is that it was Lucy and Susan that were with Aslan whenever he was sacrificed on the stone table. It was Lucy and Susan that stayed with him and was there at the resurrection. The same way as Mary was there at the resurrection of Christ. It was a woman that Christ appeared to first. It was women that Aslan first appeared to. So you can't accuse Lewis of sexism. He's being biblical. The next thing that Lewis has got accused of is, in this passage, the siblings' seemingly flippant dismissal of Susan, and they talk about her as if, Susan's no longer a friend in Narnia. It's as if they don't care. Well, that's not, you can't level that at them either, because in this point in the story, when this conversation takes place, characters in this passage aren't actually aware that they've died in the train crash. As far as they're concerned, Susan's just back home. They'll be seeing her very soon again. So you can't say that, they don't care, Susan's no longer a friend of Narnia. They don't even know that Susan is still in the world and they're actually in heaven. They don't know that yet. So you got to get that in context. That's what I'm saying. Waylaid by worldly things. Does that matter? Does that mean that Susan's not going to get to heaven? Again, Lewis doesn't actually say that. Susan's story is not finished. Lewis himself said that. She has more to her story. And Susan will find her way back. I think Lewis himself became an atheist after being brought up. His grandfather was a minister. And Lewis turned his back on his childhood faith, which a lot of people do. He turned his back on his childhood faith. Not only that, he became an atheist, and he didn't actually come to faith in Christ until at the age of 32. So I think Susan is actually quite a reflection of Lewis himself. And again, Lewis isn't saying that Susan won't find her way back. He actually said that Susan was a much more grown-up story than he wanted to write, and that her story was not finished. But Lewis does give us clues. But you've got to go right back to The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, whenever the 4 Pevensey children were being crowned as kings and queens of Narnia. And Aslan says, "Once a king or queen in Narnia, always a king or queen. Bear it well, sons of Adam. Bear it well, daughters of Eve," said Aslan. So I think one of the main things really to remember is it never ever says that Aslan or Narnia turned its back on Susan. They're still there. Susan can go back at any time. And that is a great reflection of God's love for us. That even when we turn our back on him, all we have to do is turn around. And that's why I have entitled this painting of Susan coming to Christ as the prodigal. Hope you enjoyed it, guys, and I'll see you again very, very soon. Okay, bye for now. Bye.